Okay, this is the last section of our notes on early America, and this is going to be super short, and it's on an event called the Great Awakening, which I don't want that to make you think that the Great Awakening isn't really important, but rather than do a lot of notes on this, we're going to do a little reading activity. So I'll show you the instructions for the reading, but make sure that you get the handout from me later. And then I'm going to put a video up next. It's just a little knowledge check from that reading, but make sure that you do the reading first before you go through the check questions. So when we think about the Great Awakening, I mean, the name, the definition is really in the name. If you are awakened or you are enlightened, you are receiving a new outlook, new information, maybe even a whole new life. And the Great Awakening is perceived to be just that for the colonies. Now, the Great Awakening challenges that idea that colonists have a covenant with God to only practice one very narrow version of religion. More and more people in Plymouth, in Massachusetts Bay, are being excommunicated, are being banished, are being persecuted. In the case of the Salem witchcraft trials, people are being killed for questioning or for not having the same kind of faith or practicing religion differently. And it is evident by the start of the 1700s that something needs to change. It's not evident to everybody, but to some. So those religious groups that start to form in places like Rhode Island, Baptists, Methodists, they are what we refer to as evangelical religions. Evangelical is somewhat of an umbrella term that is used in a lot of different ways. So to just think about that term for our purposes, evangelical religions are very focused on recruiting new members. They're a bit more flexible in the way that someone can practice their religion, and they are distinctly Protestant Christians. So in the mid-1700s, a lot of bigger institutional churches are breaking off into these little smaller groups of people that are thinking, I think there's a different way to interpret the Bible. I think there's a different way to practice. They start holding religious revivals outdoors. They're letting women preach. There's different kinds of music. They're reading different Bible passages. More people are encouraged to actually read the text. So this is very revolutionary because it's taking power out of the hands of a couple of elite religious leaders and putting it more in the hands of believers themselves. So I want you to think about how a wave of people really questioning their religious institution, which is a very daring thing to do, how that could pave the way for a revolution against England, against that mother country that has controlled the colonies since their very beginning. So we're going to watch a little bit of a clip here.
He has been described as short, slight of build, and cross-eyed. He was young, only 25 years old when he arrived in Philadelphia from England in 1739, on his way to set up an orphanage in Savannah, Georgia. But he was a preacher, the likes of which had never been seen before in the colonies. He was George Whitefield, and his sermons would forever change the social and religious landscape of America. The event that Whitefield initiated was called the Great Awakening, and was second only to Martin Luther's Reformation in transforming Christianity. Before Whitefield's arrival, the colonies were predominantly Protestant, divided into sects that were largely hostile to each other. However, Americans at that time were the least church-going people in the Western world. In New England in 1721, 75% of the people shunned the church. Yet thousands came to hear Whitefield, who was a fire and brimstone preacher. Whether he preached from a pulpit or in the field, Whitefield's sermons, delivered in his unique theatrical style, appealed to the emotions and the heart while disdaining any church doctrine. In one of his most notable addresses, Whitefield thundered,
"Father Abraham, who have you in heaven? Any Episcopalians? No. Any Presbyterians? No. Any Independents or Methodists? No, no, no. Whom have you there? We don't know those names here. All who are here are Christians.
Whitfield's revival-style meetings spread throughout the colonies until 1744, when the Great Awakening sputtered to a humble end. But the changes the Awakening brought about continued. The monolithic sect splintered into numerous denominations that were suited to individual preferences. Through this proliferation, they became less hostile to each other, which helped to break down barriers between colonies. The experience of the Great Awakening also cut across class lines, so that people no longer defined themselves in terms of class distinctions. Revival meetings were attended by young and old, rich and poor, educated and illiterate, men and women, and were even open to blacks and Native Americans. The result was social status became more fluid, supporting the purely American philosophy, anyone can make it. The newly enlightened of the Great Awakening turned their attention to education, founding many of today's Ivy League schools, including Princeton and Dartmouth. Science and natural history became acceptable areas of study. All sides of American society, religious and secular, moved towards a separation of church and state.